The carriage wheels murmured along the gravel road as dawn stretched its pale fingers across the estate. Ravenshade Manor stood at the end of the long lane, half shrouded in morning mist, rising with an ancient, steady dignity Adrian Winthorpe had never learned to match. He sat inside the carriage with his gloved hand resting against the cool glass window, watching the familiar silhouette appear and fade between drifting veils of fog. The estate had been his inheritance, his burden, and, after the passing of his wife, his quiet refuge. Yet every time he approached it now, the same unease stirred beneath his ribs like an unwelcome echo. His children would be awake soon. Lysander always rose before the sun, wandering the halls with the silent curiosity of a boy who spoke little but understood much. Claire, gentle as a petal and easily overwhelmed, clung to her brother and to whatever warmth remained in their fractured world. Adrian wished he could give them more than careful smiles and distracted reassurances, but the estate's debts pressed at his mind with relentless force. His late father had borrowed heavily, convinced every risky venture would bear fruit. Instead, Ravenshade's finances had crumbled quietly, leaving Adrian to negotiate extensions, persuade investors, and cling to whichever alliances could keep the manor standing. One such alliance had taken shape in the form of Lady Eleanora Greybriar, charming, well-bred, composed to an immaculate degree. She had agreed to an engagement that would ease the Winthorpe debts and strengthen both families. It was practical, respectable, necessary. But necessity rarely cared for comfort. He stepped from the carriage as the front door opened. Marin Ashford, who had served the household barely 6 months, emerged into the pale morning light. She balanced a folded blanket over one arm and carried an air of attentiveness that had become characteristic of her presence. She greeted him with a calm that held neither presumption nor fear, only genuine warmth that never overstepped its place. "Good morning, my lord," she said quietly. "The children are in the solarium. They wanted to wait for you." He nodded, grateful for her composed reliability. When she first arrived, he had hired her out of necessity, but she had become far more essential than he anticipated. She understood the children's unspoken rhythms, their fragile trust, their lingering grief. She spoke softly to Claire when the girl trembled in her sleep and guided Lysander through his anxious restlessness with patient steadiness. Adrian often wondered how the manor had felt before she came. He suspected it had been much colder. He followed Marin through the corridor, warmed by the glow of freshly lit lamps. The manor smelled faintly of citrus polish and early bread rising in the kitchen. These small comforts never reached the account's ledger that kept him awake at night, but they soothed something human in him. As they approached the solarium, the children's voices drifted softly, not playful but murmuring. Claire's delicate tone was filled with relief the moment she saw him. Lysander stood at her side, straight-backed as always, though his eyes betrayed his vigilance. Adrian knelt to embrace them, brushing a stray curl from Claire's cheek. "I'm home," he murmured, though he had barely been gone a day. Marin stepped aside, allowing the moment to settle naturally. She had a way of blending into the background without disappearing, a rare balance Adrian had come to appreciate more than he intended to. After breakfast, Lady Eleanora arrived. Her carriage gleamed like a polished gem, crisp against the early sun. She swept into the entrance hall with elegance, shaped by generations of perfect posture and impeccable manners. Her smile was flawless, formed with precision. Everything about her seemed correct, yet correctness had never eased the heaviness Adrian carried. She touched his arm lightly. "I had hoped to take tea with the children this morning," she said. "It is important that they grow comfortable with me." He agreed in words, though something inside him tightened. He watched her walk toward the parlor, her steps measured, expression serene, perfect on the surface, smooth as still water. Yet the children shrank behind him with an uneasiness they could not explain. Marin watched Eleanora disappear around the corner, her expression subtly guarded. A shadow crossed her features, faint but real. Adrian noticed. He always noticed now, though he had not yet understood why. Before he could ask what troubled her, a timid voice broke the silence. "I don't want to take tea," Claire whispered, fingers clutching the edge of her father's sleeve. Lysander's eyes flickered with the same apprehension. Marin spoke gently. "If it becomes too much, I'll be close by." Adrian nodded, though the heaviness in his chest deepened. He followed the children toward the parlor, every step echoing the strange tension that had begun threading through Ravenshade in recent weeks. Something unseen pressed, at the edges of normalcy, quiet but persistent, like the first distant tremor before a storm no one could predict. He did not yet know that the storm was already forming inside his own home. He did not yet know that Marin's steady presence would become the single, fragile barrier protecting his children from a truth they had been too afraid to speak. And he did not yet know that the letter soon to appear in his study, written by a trembling hand and sealed with desperation, would alter the course of all their lives. But the first hint of it lay in Claire's tightening grip, in Lysander's silent dread, and in Marin's watchful eyes. Something was wrong. And the morning light, gentle as it was, could not hide it. Before the day ended, he would no longer be able to ignore the signs. Before the week ended, he would face a choice that would test every promise he had ever made to himself, to his children, and to the future he thought he could control. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting soft bands of gold across the parlor floor. The tea service had been arranged with meticulous care, porcelain cups painted with delicate vines, a plate of small cakes placed neatly between silver tongs. Lady Eleanora stood by the window, her poise immaculate as she watched the children enter with hesitant steps. Adrian remained only long enough to ensure the meeting would begin smoothly. A brief conversation with the estate steward awaited him, and he left the room reluctantly, though not without noticing how Claire's fingers curled inward as Eleanora greeted her. The door closed behind him with a gentle thud, leaving the three of them in a silence too fragile to feel comfortable. Marin lingered in the hallway, pretending to straighten a vase while listening with discreet attention. She did not intend to spy, but something in the children's carriage earlier tugged at her thoughts with persistent unease. Inside, Eleanora's tone drifted outward, pleasant at first. "Sit properly, my dear. A lady mustn't slouch, even at your age." Lysander obeyed stiffly. Claire followed, though her small shoulders trembled at the formality. "Take the cup carefully," Eleanora continued. "Your father will expect grace from you, Claire. Lift your wrist slightly. No, higher. That is too awkward. Try again." Marin heard the quiet chink of porcelain against porcelain, then a barely audible gasp. "Do not flinch. It is a simple correction," Eleanora said, her voice tightening. Marin stepped toward the doorway, only to stop when a low murmur from Lysander reached her. His words were faint, as though he knew speaking might summon consequences. Eleanora's tone dipped into cold precision. "When you are with me, you must learn discipline. Fear is unbecoming. Straighten your back, quiet your breath." Marin's hand tightened around the edge of her apron. The silence that followed was longer, stretched thin like brittle glass. She knocked gently. "Pardon me, my lady, the steward requests a word regarding tomorrow's schedule." Eleanora turned her head with measured composure. "That will be all, Marin. I am quite capable of managing a simple tea. Return when I call." Marin inclined her head and stepped back, though her worry deepened with every passing second. She retreated only as far as the corner of the hallway, pretending to examine a painting so she could remain close. The soft murmur of conversation resumed, muted by distance. The words were indistinct now, but the cadence, sharp, clipped, was unmistakable. After half an hour, the parlor door opened. The children stepped out, their faces pale and strained. Claire's eyes glistened as though she had been trying hard not to cry. Lysander walked stiffly, guarding his sister with the protective silence that had grown too familiar. Marin knelt beside them. "Did everything go well?" Lysander shook his head slightly, almost imperceptibly, as though afraid the walls might hear. Claire simply pressed a hand to her chest. Marin exhaled quietly and led them to the solarium, where the air felt kinder. She gave them warm milk and sat nearby, pretending to mend a torn seam while keeping them within sight. Their breath steadied gradually, though the tension clung to them like a shadow. Later that evening, Adrian passed through the corridor on his way to the study. He paused when he saw the children curled together on the solarium sofa. The quiet way they clung to each other made something twist sharply inside him. "Is everything all right?" he asked softly. Marin met his gaze across the room. "They were unsettled after tea. I stayed with them until they calmed." He approached, brushing a hand over Lysander's shoulder. The boy didn't pull away, but he didn't relax either. Claire leaned into Marin instead of her father, and Adrian felt the sting of that with unsettling clarity. "I see," he murmured. "Thank you for looking after them." Marin nodded. The words she longed to speak hovered on her tongue, but she held them back. She needed certainty before burdening him with fears that might be misplaced. Yet she could not dismiss the dread lingering at the base of her thoughts. After escorting the children to their rooms, Adrian lingered in the hall, replaying the afternoon's unease. He had expected discomfort. Children rarely warmed to new guardians easily, but this felt different. There was a tremor in Claire's hands whenever Eleanora entered the room, a stiffness in Lysander's posture that hinted at something deeper. He entered his study with the intention of reviewing estate accounts, but found his attention wandering. Numbers blurred, figures refused to settle. The silence pressed around him with an insistence he could not quiet. Downstairs, after the children slept, Marin sat alone in the small servant's sitting room. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows that danced across the stone floor. She tried to focus on her sewing, but her thoughts circled the same question again and again. Had she imagined the severity in Lady Eleanora's tone, or had she stumbled upon something that demanded action? The memory of Claire's trembling fingers answered for her. She rose from her chair and moved to the window, watching the last traces of twilight fade behind the hills. The unease she carried had grown into something sharper, no longer a whisper but a warning. If she stayed silent, the children would continue enduring something they lacked the words to describe. If she spoke too boldly, she risked not only her position but the fragile calm Adrian relied on as he battled the estate's worsening financial strain. The choice weighed heavily. That night, she resolved to watch closely, very closely. If there was truth behind her fear, she would not ignore it. Not for the sake of caution, not even for her job. For the children's sake, she would stay alert, and she would be ready. The first crack had formed in the mask Lady Eleonora so carefully wore. Marin knew it would not be the last. The following afternoon unfolded with an eerie quiet that settled over the manor like a thin veil. Marin went about her tasks with habitual care, but her thoughts remained tethered to the memory of Claire's trembling hands and Lysander's hollow stiffness. She tried to distract herself by dusting the tall shelves in the library and arranging linens in the nursery, yet every gentle movement carried the weight of a question she had not stopped asking herself. What truly happened behind the closed doors of the parlor? By mid-afternoon, Lady Eleonora summoned the children again, this time under the pretense of proper posture exercises. Adrian had left earlier to meet an accountant in the village, and the manor felt emptier without his grounding presence. Marin followed at a distance as the children made their way to the drawing room, wishing she could shield them from whatever unease awaited. As she passed the threshold, she paused, pretending to adjust a crooked wall sconce while listening to the exchange inside. "Stand up straight, Lysander," Eleonora said, her tone smooth on the surface yet sharpened beneath. "A future gentleman must cultivate poise, not fidget like a restless stray." Lysander tried to correct himself, lifting his chin with practiced obedience. Claire followed timidly, her small hands clasped in front of her skirt. "No, not like that," Eleonora continued. "Raise your shoulders. Do not slouch. Keep still. Still means still. Do you understand?" Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she paced around them. The children tried to remain motionless, though their breathing grew shallow. Marin's pulse quickened. She knew the tone of someone who believed discipline was measured by discomfort. She had seen it in other households, but she had prayed never to witness it here. A sudden, sharp sound, a small object falling, rang through the room. Claire had dropped a decorative ribbon she had been told to hold evenly between her hands. Eleonora's voice cooled further. "Pick it up without bending your knees." Claire hesitated. As though the instruction made no sense, Lysander watched, his jaw tightening. "Do it," Eleonora repeated. Claire bent instinctively, her knees dipping slightly. Marin heard the faint gasp that followed, not from the girl but from Eleonora. "You disobeyed a simple instruction." "It slipped," Claire whispered. "Eleonora," Marin said quietly as she stepped into the doorway, unable to stay silent any longer. "Perhaps they need a moment to rest." Eleonora turned with slow deliberation. "Marin, your presence was not requested." The children stared at Marin with pleading eyes she could no longer turn away from. She stepped closer despite the warning in Eleonora's expression. "They have been standing for quite a while," Marin continued softly. "A short pause might help them focus." "What they need," Eleonora said, her voice lowering, "is structure. You encourage softness when firmness is required." Marin felt her breath catch. "They are still healing from losing their mother. Gentle guidance is not weakness." Eleonora lifted her chin. "I am preparing them for their future, not coddling their past." Before Marin could reply, Claire swayed slightly from exhaustion. Lysander caught her elbow, steadying her. The simple gesture struck Marin like a blow. Eleonora noticed as well. If she cannot manage a minor exercise, she will never grow into the role expected of her. Her father will be disappointed. The words were spoken with composure, yet they held something quietly cruel. Claire's eyes widened as though struck by something invisible. Marin reached forward and touched the girl's shoulder. "It's all right." She spoke gently, firmly, with no pretense of deference now. "Come with me for a moment." Eleonora stepped forward. "You will not undermine me." "I am not undermining you," Marin replied, meeting her gaze. "I am protecting them." The silence that followed pulsed with unspoken anger. Eleonora finally turned away and dismissed her with a flick of her wrist. Marin guided the children out of the room, her heart racing. She led them to the quiet safety of the upper corridor where the afternoon light softened the harshness they had endured. Lysander stood close to Claire, who clung to Marin's sleeve as though afraid the walls themselves might echo with reprimands. Marin knelt beside them. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered. "Not one thing." Claire blinked up at her, eyes glossy with fear. "Will she tell Father I wasn't good?" "No," Marin assured gently. I won't allow that. Lysander swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. She says we have to be better. You are enough just as you are, Marin replied, brushing a hand over his hair. You should never feel afraid in your own home. As she embraced them both, a realization settled over her with painful clarity. This was not discomfort. This was not mere strictness. This was harm concealed beneath polished manners and refined gestures. And if Adrian continued unaware, the children would suffer in silence until something deeper and darker rooted itself inside them. She could not permit that. When the children finally returned to their room, Marin walked slowly toward the servants' quarters. Her steps were steady outwardly, yet her mind churned with 1,000 thoughts. She stood by the window, staring at the dimming sky, her hands trembling. No one would believe the word of a servant over that of a well-bred lady. If she spoke openly, she would be dismissed. The children would lose the only protection they had. Adrian would be left blind to what quietly unfolded under his own roof. She needed another way, one that allowed her to tell the truth without risking her immediate removal. A letter, anonymous, placed where he would certainly find it, with details too precise to ignore. Her breath left her in a slow, deliberate exhale as the decision settled fully in her chest. She retrieved a sheet of parchment, a quill, and an inkpot. The candle beside her flickered softly, casting a small circle of light across the writing desk. She dipped the quill, hesitated, then began to write, her script careful but trembling. She did not sign her name. She did not reveal her position. She wrote only the truth, plain and urgent. When she finished, she folded the letter with steady hands. The seal she pressed into the warm wax bore no identifying mark. It was nothing more than a simple shape, chosen precisely because it meant nothing. Late that night, after the household had settled, she moved silently through the corridor to Adrian's study. The faint glow beneath the door told her he had stepped away only briefly, perhaps to check on the children. She placed the letter atop the ledgers scattered on his desk, where he could not miss it. Then she slipped away, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The truth was now in his hands, though he did not yet know it. And for the first time since she arrived at Ravenshade, Marin felt the fragile mix of fear and hope that comes when doing the right thing costs more than silence ever could. By morning, nothing in the manor would remain the same. The household stirred awake slowly the next morning, unaware that a single folded letter had already begun reshaping the air around Ravenshade. Adrian entered his study before breakfast, hoping to review the latest correspondence from the estate's creditors. The room was still cool from the night, and a faint scent of parchment lingered in the quiet. He approached his desk and paused. The letter lay atop the open ledger, not tucked beneath a file, not slipped discreetly into a corner, but placed squarely where his eyes would fall first. The parchment was plain, the seal unmarked, the edges neatly aligned. Something about its stillness unsettled him. He lifted it slowly, breaking the wax with his thumb. The paper opened with a soft crackle. The handwriting was careful but uneven, as though written under strain. He read the first line, then the second. With each sentence, a tightening sensation coiled through his chest. He read of Claire's trembling, of Lysander's rigid fear, of a voice that sharpened discipline into something colder, of expectations applied with quiet severity, of afternoons behind closed doors that left the children pale and shaken. The letter contained no accusation of malice, only a plea. Look closer. They are not safe in the way you believe. There was no signature, no hint of identity, just truth, plain and quiet on the page. He stood motionless for a long moment. The study felt suddenly smaller, the walls closer, as though the air itself had shifted. He read the letter again, slower this time, absorbing the weight of each word. He wanted to dismiss it as exaggeration or misunderstanding. But the memory of Claire clutching Marin's sleeve yesterday surfaced with sharp clarity. The distant look in Lysander's eyes. The fragile stillness that had no place in childhood. A quiet dread began to stir beneath his ribs. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat. Then he stepped out into the corridor. He found Marin in the breakfast room, helping the children with their morning meal. She looked up, her expression composed, though a flicker of concern crossed her eyes when she saw him. Adrian hesitated, searching her face for signs of familiarity with the letter's contents. But she offered no hint, only the gentle steadiness she always carried. "Are they well this morning?" he asked softly. Marin nodded. They slept quietly, though they woke earlier than usual. Lysander glanced at his father briefly, then returned to his bowl. Claire avoided looking at the doorway beyond him, as though fearing someone else might enter. Adrian felt the letter burn quietly against his chest. After breakfast, Eleonora arrived earlier than expected. Her carriage wheels crushed the gravel with brisk certainty. She stepped from it, adorned in pale lavender, her expression polished and bright. "I thought we might resume our lessons a bit sooner today," she said lightly. "Consistency is vital." Adrian nodded, though something in him resisted. He watched her greet the children, Claire's shoulders tense beneath her dress. Lysander's fingers curled around the edge of the doorway, tightening as she approached. Adrian felt the first real fracture of doubt. When Eleanora led them toward the music room, he remained nearby under the guise of reviewing estate letters at the hall table. He positioned himself where their faint voices reached him. At first, her tone was smooth. Then came the shift, subtle but sharp at the edges. "Your posture is slipping again. Lift your chin higher. Do not hesitate. It is unbecoming. Try again, properly." The children's responses were soft. He leaned slightly, trying to catch more, but the words dissipated into strained silence. He closed his folder of letters, unable to focus. Later in the morning, he made his way through the manor with a purpose he had not yet named aloud. He appeared in places he rarely lingered. By the staircase landing, near the east corridor archway, beside the door leading to the upper sitting room. He kept a distance, but he watched. He saw Claire flatten herself against a wall when Eleanora passed by unexpectedly. He saw Lysander subtly shift his body to put himself between his sister and the room she avoided. He saw the shadows that flickered across their faces when Eleanora instructed them to follow her. None of this was enough to accuse, but it was enough to fear. That afternoon he found Marin in the gallery dusting frames. She looked up as he approached. "Have you noticed the children withdrawing lately?" he asked quietly. She studied him, as though weighing the intent behind his question. "They have been anxious," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "More than before." "Because of their lessons?" Her gaze lowered for a moment. Children often reveal their discomfort in small ways. Sometimes adults overlook them. He wanted to ask more, but something held him back. The awareness that she might be protecting her position, or the children, or both. He thanked her and left, though her gentle caution clung to him long after. By evening his thoughts had gathered into a single, undeniable realization. The letter had not been written out of malice or meddling. It had been written out of worry, perhaps even desperation, and he could not confront Eleanora without proof. He needed certainty. He needed truth without distortion. As twilight deepened, he walked the hallway leading to the children's sitting room. The door stood slightly ajar. He slipped inside and examined every corner until his gaze fell upon the tall wardrobe pressed against the far wall. Its carved wooden doors stood silent and harmless, but its interior was large enough to conceal him if he crouched. He rested his hand on the cool brass handle. If the letter was true, then what happened behind closed doors needed to be heard without interference, without performance, without the presence of an adult Eleanora wished to impress. Only silence, pure, unguarded silence, would reveal what his eyes had missed. He opened the wardrobe slowly. The scent of cedar drifted out, calm and familiar. He stepped inside. He would listen. He would wait. And whatever truth unfolded, he would face it fully. For the first time since he became a father, the weight of responsibility settled on him, not as duty, but as resolve. If harm had taken root in Ravenshade, he would uncover it. If his children needed a shield, he would be that shield. And if the letter's warnings proved justified, nothing, no alliance, no investment, no polite expectation, would prevent him from acting. He closed the wardrobe door behind him, the soft click echoing like a vow. The wardrobe interior was dim, the cedar-scented air warmer than Adrian expected. He crouched carefully, testing the balance of the wooden floor beneath him. A narrow sliver of light seeped through the gap between the doors, thin enough to shield him, yet wide enough for him to see the faint shapes of the room beyond. He waited. The manor settled into its afternoon hush, the muted clatter of distant dishes, the whisper of a passing draft, the low hum of routine. His heartbeat echoed too loudly in his ears, but he steadied it with slow breaths learned long ago during sleepless nights. Then footsteps approached, two lighter sets, one graceful, deliberate. The door to the children's sitting room opened with a soft creak. Claire's voice floated in timid fragments before fading into hesitant silence. Lysander's steps were careful, the kind of carefulness that never belonged to children unless fear had taught it to them. Eleanora's heels tapped against the floor, measured, unhurried. "Begin your exercises," she said, her tone smooth as polished glass. "We agreed yesterday that practice must be consistent." Adrian leaned slightly, watching through the thin line of light. Claire raised her arms in a trembling arc, attempting to hold her position. Lysander followed suit, though his jaw tightened as he focused on maintaining perfect stillness. Eleanora circled them like an instructor assessing flawed students. "Your shoulders are uneven again, Claire," she said mildly. "Raise the left one. No, higher. A timid posture reflects a timid character. You must learn to present confidence, not cling to childish fragility. Claire tried to obey, but her arm wavered. Eleonora moved closer. Straighten, she said quietly. Hold it. Do not lower it, no matter what. Claire's breath hitched. The tension in her small frame deepened. Eleonora turned to Lysander. And you? Your stance is rigid in all the wrong ways. A gentleman controls his form without appearing strained. You look as though you are bracing for a blow. Again, reset your posture. Lysander did as instructed, though a subtle flinch betrayed how deeply the words pierced him. Adrian's pulse thudded harder. The letter's warnings resurfaced with new sharpness. Eleonora walked between them, hands clasped behind her back. Every correction came with a softness that coded something harsher. You must understand, she continued, her voice almost tender, that expectations placed upon you are not optional. If you embarrass your father with sloppy behavior, it will reflect poorly on the entire household. Surely you do not want that. Claire lowered her gaze. I'm sorry. Eleonora tapped a finger beneath the girl's chin. Look up when you speak. Apologies mean nothing when given to the floor. Claire stiffened as though the gentle touch had stung. Eleonora stepped away, sighing faintly. Do it again. They repeated the motions, over and over. Adrian watched the way Claire's arms trembled, how Lysander's breath shortened as he tried to remain steady. It was not physical punishment, no raised voice, no harsh command, but the quiet pressure pressed upon them with an intensity he had not understood until this moment. A pause came only when Claire's balance wavered and she swayed. She caught herself, but her shoulders hunched in instinctive fear of the reaction she expected. You lost focus, Eleonora said. Begin again. My arms hurt, Claire whispered. Pain is temporary. Character is not. When Claire failed to lift her arms quickly, Eleonora reached toward her face, not violently, not even roughly, simply tipping her chin upward with 2 fingers. You must stop being afraid, she murmured. Fear is unbecoming. Remember that. Lysander took a small step toward his sister, unable to remain still any longer. Eleonora's gaze sharpened. Return to your place. He paused. She's tired. That is irrelevant. She must learn. Lysander's voice grew barely audible. She can't breathe right. Eleonora straightened. Do not contradict me. Before Adrian could move, before he could even think beyond the haze of shock threading through him, the door opened again. Marin entered quickly, carrying a tray with 2 small cups of water. Her eyes widened when she saw the children, their strained posture, Claire's damp lashes. I thought they might need a break, Marin said, her voice steady though tension pooled beneath it. Eleonora turned slowly. This is not your decision. Marin set the tray down with soft finality. They are flushed. Let them rest. Eleonora's expression cooled. You presume too much. I care for them, Marin replied, stepping to Claire's side. And I cannot watch them struggle like this. You question my methods again? I question anything that frightens them. Eleonora stepped closer until only a breath separated them. Her voice dropped into a low murmur. You forget your place, Marin. Adrian watched Marin hold her ground. Not bold, not defiant, simply steady. My place, she answered quietly, is beside the children when they are frightened. The silence that followed trembled like a drawn thread. Eleonora pointed toward the door. Leave at once. Marin did not move. Claire needs air. Claire's small hand reached instinctively toward Marin's skirt, confirming what words could not. Adrian's breath caught in his chest. Eleonora's voice lost its veneer of calm. You are overstepping. No, Marin said gently. I am protecting them. For a moment, something dark flickered behind Eleonora's eyes. Not rage, but wounded pride sharpened into something brittle. Then Eleonora stepped back, folding her arms with rigid poise. Very well. If you insist on interfering, take them. But this disruption will not continue. Marin guided Claire toward the door, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Lysander followed silently, but not before throwing a cautious glance over his shoulder, as though making sure Eleonora did not stop them. As they reached the exit, Marin paused a moment, the tension in the room thick enough to feel. Eleonora's final words lingered harshly in the air. They must be shaped, Marin. If you encourage weakness, they will never grow strong. Marin turned slightly. Strength is not born from fear. Then she led the children out. The door closed behind them. The echo settled. Eleonora remained still for a moment, the poised line of her figure trembling at the edges. All this softness, she whispered to the empty room, will leave them unprepared. She did not know Adrian stood only a few steps away, cloaked in cedar dark shadows, hearing every word. His heart moved through shock, then disbelief, then something colder, an anger quiet enough to steady him rather than ignite him. He pushed open the wardrobe door and stepped into the room. Eleonora turned sharply, her composure cracking as surprise flashed across her face. "Adrian?" He held the letter in one hand, the truth in his expression unmistakable. "Tell me," he said, his voice calm but unyielding, "why my children are more afraid each day than the last." Eleonora swallowed, searching for an explanation shaped to sound reasonable. But his eyes left no room for performance, no stage on which she could rehearse gentleness. He had heard her. He had seen them. There was no turning away. The silence between them deepened, heavy with what could no longer be denied. Adrian stood in the center of the room, the wardrobe door still shifting gently behind him, as though the air itself had not caught up with what had just taken place. Eleonora's posture tightened into a rigid line, every inch of her trained elegance straining to maintain its composure. "You were hiding in the wardrobe?" she asked, her voice thin. "I was listening," Adrian replied, his tone measured. "And I heard enough." A faint tremor passed through her expression before she masked it with a brittle smile. "It seems there has been a misunderstanding. Children often react dramatically to guidance, especially those lacking firm instruction." His gaze did not waver. "I watched my daughter flinch at your voice. I watched my son brace himself as though expecting to be chastised, merely for breathing too loudly. That is not guidance." Eleonora folded her hands together, the gesture precise but trembling slightly. "Adrian, you are allowing sentiment to color your judgment. I am preparing them for the expectations that await your family. If they remain fragile, society will not spare them." "Do not speak of my children as though their fear is an inconvenience," he said quietly. She stepped toward him. "I have done nothing beyond teaching them discipline. Their mother indulged them far too much. Someone must correct the softness left behind." The air shifted. A cold, deliberate calm settled over his voice. "You do not have the right to speak of their mother." The silence that followed stretched painfully thin. Eleonora swallowed. "If you felt concern, we could have discussed adjustments. But secrecy? Spying? Do you truly believe I would harm the children of the man I am to marry?" "You already have," he said. Her lips parted in shock. She took a step back as though the words had struck her physically. "You cannot mean, Adrian, one incident of discomfort does not erase the benefits of what we have planned. Your estate needs stability. Your children need refinement. You need partnership." "I need none of what you describe," he answered. "And my children need kindness, not correction." She exhaled sharply. "You would jeopardize everything because of a servant's interference?" His expression darkened. "Marin spoke only when you left her no choice. And the letter I received did not come from jealousy or ambition. It came from fear for two children I have failed to protect." Eleonora's composure fractured. "You cannot end our engagement on sentiment. My father's investments are tied to your ventures. Your estate depends on our alliance." His reply came without hesitation. "Then the estate will stand without it." Her face blanched, the realization struck with sudden force. "You are serious," she whispered. "Entirely." She drew in a slow breath and steadied herself. "If you dismiss me publicly, you will humiliate my family. My father will not tolerate such insult. I am aware." "You truly believe you can discard this engagement without consequence?" "I am ending it," he said simply, "not discarding it. Our intentions were practical, not emotional, but no future secured through convenience is worth the cost paid by my children." The finality in his tone silenced her. She straightened her shoulders, her expression smoothing into something cold and hollow. "Then I will leave Ravenshade today," she said, "and you may convey your decision to my father as you see fit." Adrian nodded once. "I will write to him." Her eyes glinted sharply. "Do not underestimate him." With that, she turned and exited the room, her step steady, her dignity preserved by sheer force of will. Yet something in her retreat felt less like anger and more like a warning. That evening, the quiet inside Ravenshade felt unusually strained. Adrian retreated to his study to compose the letter he had promised. He wrote carefully, explaining his decision without malice, attributing it to irreconcilable differences regarding the children's upbringing. He sealed the letter and sent it by courier before dawn. The reply came faster than expected. On the second morning, as he sat sorting through estate ledgers, a knock sounded on his study door. The steward stepped inside with a pale expression and a folded document. "My lord, this was delivered directly from Lord Greybriar's office." Adrian accepted it and unfolded the crisp paper. The handwriting belonged to Greybriar's legal secretary, the tone terse and unyielding. The message was brief. "All investment support for the Ravenshade Mining Partnership is hereby withdrawn effective immediately. Loan extensions previously negotiated are nullified. Outstanding balances are expected to be settled within the next quarter. Failure to comply will result in formal legal action. A quiet pulse of disbelief thrummed behind Adrian's ribs. The steward hesitated. My lord, if these demands stand, the estate cannot sustain the strain, not with the yields from the last season. I know, Adrian said softly. A second letter was attached beneath the first. This one bore Greybriar's personal signature. You have publicly insulted my daughter and jeopardized a strategic alliance. You will honor your debts promptly. I will not be undermined by sentimentality. A faint pressure settled behind Adrian's eyes. Not shock. He had expected retaliation, but the full weight of it pressed harder than he anticipated. The steward watched him cautiously. Shall I prepare the accounts for immediate review? Adrian folded the letters, sliding them into the drawer with measured calm. Yes, I will examine them this afternoon. When the steward left, the silence of the study closed around him. For a long moment, Adrian sat at his desk, staring at the faint scratches across the wood's surface. The price had come swiftly, but he did not regret the choice. Later that day, Marin found him in the corridor outside the children's room. He stood there quietly, his expression composed, but shadowed by thought. Is everything all right? She asked gently. He turned to her with a steadiness that masked the turmoil beneath. Changes are coming to the estate. Difficult ones, but they are necessary. She searched his face. You look burdened. His gaze softened. Perhaps I am, but I would bear far more if it meant safeguarding Lysander and Claire. Marin lowered her eyes, certain now that whatever consequences had fallen upon him, they had fallen because he had chosen to believe in the truth she had carried alone. He offered a faint, tired smile. I will navigate what comes. The only thing I cannot navigate is the thought of them enduring what I heard yesterday. Her breath caught quietly. He glanced toward the children's door. I will not let them suffer again. The words were quiet, but they settled with the force of a vow. Beyond the walls of the manor, Greybriar's influence was already moving, gathering momentum like a storm rolling in from distant hills. And though Adrian could not yet see the full scale of the damage, he knew the path ahead would demand more of him than he had ever been required to give. But his choice had been made. There was no turning back. The days that followed brought a subtle but undeniable shift to Ravenshade Manor. It began in whispers carried by messenger riders who delivered letters too quickly, in tense conversations between stewards, in the tightened expressions of the senior staff when they passed one another in the corridors. Something unsettled had seeped into the quiet order of the estate, spreading like an invisible draft through every room. The full scope of Greybriar's retaliation unfolded in the week that followed. Suppliers delayed shipments. Creditors who once granted leniency now pressed for immediate payment. Even neighbors, once cordial, grew cautious, offering polite greetings edged with wary hesitation. Ravenshade had become the subject of quiet speculation. And speculation, in aristocratic circles, was merely the first sign of impending scandal. Lady Honoria arrived 3 mornings after the letters had been delivered. Her carriage rolled to a precise stop before the manor steps, and she descended with the practiced dignity of someone who had spent her entire life navigating the treacherous balance of reputation and survival. Adrian met her in the entrance hall. She took one look at him and frowned. You look exhausted. I assume that means the situation with Lord Greybriar is as dire as the rumors suggest. Rumors travel quickly, he said quietly. Quicker than truth, she replied, which is precisely why we must address this before the whispers turn into something far more harmful. He led her to the smaller sitting room. Honoria listened in measured silence as he explained the dissolution of the engagement and Greybriar's swift retaliation. She did not interrupt, but her fingers tightened around the armrest as he spoke. When he finished, she drew a long, restrained breath. You should have consulted me before taking such a decisive step. I could have mediated. This outcome is not easily repaired. I will not reconsider, Adrian said. She studied him, her sharp eyes softening, if only briefly. I did not come to undo your choice, but to weigh the damage and determine how the family must proceed. He nodded. Honoria leaned forward slightly. There is one issue more pressing than the financial retaliation. What issue? The manner in which you ended the engagement has created a narrative that people will twist to their advantage unless you silence it quickly. His brow furrowed. What narrative? She hesitated, rare for her. That a servant, she said slowly, interfered in your household affairs and influenced your decision. He stiffened. Marin had nothing to do with the end of the engagement. Perception cares little for accuracy, Honoria replied. People are already speaking. They say you humiliated Eleonora in her moment of advantage and broke your alliance because of undue attachment to someone beneath your station. Adrian's jaw tensed. Those are lies. Lies can become truth if repeated often enough, Honoria said. You have children, an estate, responsibilities that will not bend to noble intentions alone. He looked away, frustration threading through him. Marin protected the children when I failed to see what was happening, nothing more. That may be true, Honoria answered, but the world does not care for nuance. Greybriar will use every whisper to frame the downfall of this engagement as an insult engineered by a scheming maid. He stiffened. Marin has never schemed a day in her life. I agree, Honoria said gently, but the danger lies not in who she is, but in what others choose to believe. Adrian's silence confirmed the weight of that truth. Honoria folded her hands. We must distance the family from her before gossip evolves into lasting damage. He looked at her sharply. Distance? It would be best if she left Ravenshade, Honoria said, each word firm, but not unkind. Temporarily at least, until the noise fades. Adrian's chest tightened, as though a hand had closed around it. She is the children's anchor. Removing her now would unsettle them further. Consider the alternative, Honoria pressed softly. If the rumors grow shadows, the children will be forced to bear them. Their mother is gone. Their future must not begin under a cloud attributed to their governess. He swallowed, unable to ignore the logic he despised. Honoria stood. Speak with her. Explain the situation with compassion. If she truly cares for the children, she will understand the necessity. Marin was in the schoolroom later that afternoon, helping Claire fasten ribbons to a sketchbook while Lysander worked quietly beside them. The children brightened when Adrian entered, but the expression on his face dimmed the moment. He waited until the twins had moved to the corner of the room to sort old pencils before he approached Marin. I need to speak with you, he said gently. She set aside the ribbon she had been tying. Of course. He struggled for a moment, searching for words that would not wound. My aunt arrived this morning. The news of the broken engagement has spread faster than I anticipated. Marin's hands folded in her lap. I understand. No, he said quietly. I do not think you do. People have begun to make assumptions, harmful ones. They claim you had influence over my decision. She blinked, startled. I know, he said quickly. I know that. But the rumors do not care for truth. Marin's shoulders stiffened slightly. What does your aunt advise? He hesitated, then answered with quiet reluctance. She believes it would be safer for you to leave Ravenshade for a time. Not permanently, only until the situation stabilizes. The silence that followed felt impossibly heavy. Marin lowered her gaze. I see. If there were another way, you do not have to explain, she said softly. Your position is difficult. I would never wish to create additional burdens. Her voice remained steady, though he could see her fingers fold tightly into her apron. He hated the necessity of the conversation. This is not a reflection of your service or your character. You have been the children's sanctuary. At that, her composure trembled briefly. I care for them deeply. Leaving will not be easy. He exhaled, the weight of the moment pressing harder. I am sorry. No, she murmured. You are doing what you must. They stood in silence until Claire returned, clutching a page of uneven drawings. When she saw the tension between them, her small brow creased. Is something wrong? She asked. Marin forced a gentle smile. No, sweetheart. Lysander lingered near Adrian with watchful eyes. He sensed more than he could name. Marin turned to the children. Why don't we finish our lesson tomorrow? I think you should rest for now. They nodded, though uncertainty flickered across their faces. When Marin left the room, Adrian watched her go with a heaviness he had not felt in years. She walked quietly down the corridor, her steps measured, her head bowed, not in defeat, but in acceptance of a burden she had never sought. He remained in the doorway long after she disappeared, feeling the walls of the manor grow colder around him. He had protected his children from one danger, only to expose the woman who had stood for them to another. And though he held authority over every corner of Ravenshade, he had never felt so powerless. Marin's room rested at the far end of the servants' corridor, quiet and tucked beneath the slope of the manor's eaves. The late afternoon light filtered through the small window, casting an amber glow across the narrow bed and the single wooden trunk she had opened hours earlier. Clothes lay neatly folded inside, along with a few treasured belongings, a small pressed flower from Claire, a smooth pebble Lysander had once offered her without a word, and a ribbon she had used to tie back her hair on her first day at Ravenshade. She touched each item with a careful hand, hoping the gesture would steady her. It didn't. Leaving had felt simple when Lady Honoria first spoke the words. Necessary? Practical. even logical. But as the day unfolded, and as the children's fragile attempts to stay close to her pierced her composure one moment after another, her resolve wavered. She closed the lid halfway, unable to press it shut. A soft knock sounded at the door. She froze, not because she didn't expect someone, but because she already knew who it must be. No other footstep held that quiet certainty, that restrained heaviness, that mixture of authority and ache. "Marin," Adrian said from the doorway, his voice low. "May I come in?" She inhaled once, carefully, then answered, "Yes." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him with a gentleness that made her heart tighten. The small room felt even smaller now, crowded not by furniture but by everything unsaid. His gaze fell to the trunk. "You've begun packing." "I thought it best," she replied softly. "Your aunt's concerns aren't unfounded. I don't wish to invite further harm to the children, or to the estate." "You should not have been placed in this position," he murmured. "I'm not angry," she said. "Just sorry." The words settled between them, fragile and wrong. He stepped closer. "What are you sorry for?" "For being the cause of trouble," she whispered. "For drawing eyes that were never meant to look my way. For making the children part of something they cannot understand." She hesitated. "And for forcing you into conflict when you already have so much to bear." He shook his head. "You haven't forced me into anything. You've only shown me what I should have seen long before." She lowered her gaze. "That doesn't change the consequences." "No," he admitted, "it doesn't." Silence expanded around them, soft, aching, almost tender. Outside, the wind brushed against the window pane, carrying the faint rustle of leaves. Adrian moved closer, stopping only when he stood a breath away from her. "Marin," he said quietly, "do you believe I want you to leave?" Her breath trembled. "Want and need are different things, my lord." "Not in this," he answered. She lifted her eyes to his. There was no command in his expression, no expectation, only sincerity layered with exhaustion, and something deeper he had not yet dared to name. "I owe you a debt," he continued, "not for a single act, but for the countless moments in which you held this family together when I could not. You protected my children with a courage I failed to muster until too late. You walked into storms I didn't see forming, and now you stand ready to walk away to shield us once again." His voice tightened. "I cannot allow that." "You must," she said quietly. "Your aunt is right. Rumors are dangerous. They grow and multiply. They could follow Claire and Lysander for years." "And what of the truth?" he asked gently. "Should it matter less than shadows spoken behind closed doors?" She looked away, unable to bear the weight in his eyes. "Truth doesn't stop damage," she murmured. "It rarely does." Adrian reached out tentatively, as though afraid she might pull away. His fingertips brushed hers with the lightest touch. She did not move. "I have spent years trying to repair this estate," he said, "trying to prove myself worthy of the responsibilities left to me. But none of that matters if the people under my roof live in quiet suffering. You were the one who saw what my children endured. You were the one who acted when I hesitated." His voice lowered. "I won't lose you to the same fear that once blinded me." Her breath caught. "I don't want to go," she confessed in a trembling whisper. "But staying feels dangerous too." "For whom?" he asked. "For you," she answered. "And for them. If I stay, people will talk. They already do. And their words could stain everything you fought to protect." He stepped closer still, closing the small distance between them. "Marin," he said, "I am capable of withstanding gossip. I am capable of restoring finances. I am capable of carrying burdens." His voice softened. "What I cannot do is watch someone who has become essential to this family disappear under the weight of a lie." A quiet moment passed before he spoke again, this time with a vulnerability he rarely revealed. "If I were not the master of this manor," he said, "if I were simply a man with 2 children who needed guidance and a heart muddled by gratitude turning into something far more dangerous, would you still insist on leaving?" Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. He continued, voice low and trembling with truth. "If I asked you to stay not because of duty or convenience, but because I—" He hesitated, the word catching. "Because I care for you. Would that make any difference?" Her breath faltered. "You mustn't say things you cannot take back." "I am not taking anything back," he said. "Not now. Not ever." She closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the gentle intensity of his words. "Adrian, you can't ask this of me unless you understand what it would mean." He held her gaze with unwavering steadiness. "Then let me ask plainly." Her heart hammered as he took her hands fully in his. "If I stood before you as a man stripped of wealth, stripped of rank, striving for nothing but a place in your life, would you become my wife?" The words landed softly but altered the room entirely. She stared at him, stunned. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I am asking you to marry me." The room grew impossibly still. Marin's hands trembled in his, her eyes filling with a mixture of hope and fear. "You mean that?" she whispered. "With everything in me." She drew in a shaky breath. "I need time, not because I doubt you, but because I fear what my presence might cost you and the children." He nodded slowly, though disappointment flickered beneath the acceptance. "Take whatever time you need. I won't pressure you." Her voice softened. "Thank you." He stepped back reluctantly as though leaving her felt wrong. "But understand this. Your leaving will not spare us. It will only wound us differently." She looked at the half-packed trunk. "I don't know what the right choice is yet." "Then stay long enough to find out," he said quietly. Their eyes held for a moment that stretched warm and fragile. Then he turned toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. "Whatever you decide, Marin, nothing you've done has ever harmed this family. You've only brought light to a place that needed it more than you could know." When he was gone, Marin sank slowly onto the edge of the bed, her hands pressed against her lips, trembling with the weight of a future she had never imagined. The trunk remained open, neither packed nor abandoned, caught in the same uncertainty that now filled her heart. She did not yet know which choice she would make, but she knew his words would echo through her long into the night. The morning Adrian left for London carried a muted stillness, the kind that settled before a storm fully revealed its shape. He departed before the children woke, though he had paused at their doorways long enough to watch them breathe softly in their sleep. He had lingered outside Marin's room as well, but the faint outline of her shadow beneath the crack of her door made him step away before the urge to knock overcame him. The journey to London felt longer than usual. Each mile seemed pulled taut, with the weight of decisions waiting ahead. The city's distant hum greeted him with brisk indifference when he finally arrived, its streets crowded with merchants, carriages, and the restless pace of a place unconcerned with personal burdens. He entered Lord Greybriar's office shortly before noon. The building was sleek, imposing, its stone exterior gleaming beneath the pale sun. Inside, polished floors echoed with the clipped steps of clerks and legal aides. The hall smelled faintly of ink and cold ambition, an atmosphere Greybriar cultivated meticulously. Adrian was shown to the private meeting room, where Greybriar waited with a precise stillness. Greybriar was not a tall man, but his presence was sharpened by confidence and influence. His hair, streaked with iron, framed a face marked by resolute lines. He looked at Adrian with cool detachment, as though greeting an adversary rather than an estranged future son-in-law. "You requested this meeting," Greybriar said, his voice even. "I trust you have come prepared to discuss repayment." Adrian sat across from him. "I came to discuss fairness." "Fairness," Greybriar repeated with faint disdain, "is a luxury afforded to those who honor agreements. You did not." "I ended a private understanding between two families," Adrian replied. "That is all." Greybriar leaned back, his expression tightening. "You humiliated my daughter. You damaged her reputation, and you jeopardized a partnership built on years of careful investment. I ended the engagement because our expectations for the children were incompatible." "You ended it out of sentiment," Greybriar corrected sharply. "Out of weakness. Do not pretend otherwise." Adrian met his gaze squarely. "I ended it because Claire and Lysander suffered under Eleanora's instruction." A flicker of irritation flashed in Greybriar's eyes. "Children are sensitive creatures. They often misinterpret guidance." "If it were guidance," Adrian answered quietly, "I would not be here." Greybriar waved a dismissive hand. "Your judgment is clouded by grief and guilt. Eleanora merely attempted to instill discipline where there was softness. Discipline should not inspire fear. Fear," Greybriar said, "is a necessary ingredient of respect." Adrian's breath tightened. "Not in my household." Greybriar set his jaw. "Your household will collapse if you refuse to comply with my demands. I have already instructed my solicitors to prepare legal action. If the debt is not settled promptly, Ravenshade will face seizure of assets." "You would go that far?" Adrian asked quietly. "For my daughter, yes." Adrian reached into his coat and withdrew a folder of papers. "Before you pursue legal action, I suggest you consider the consequences for your own family." Greybriar's eyes narrowed. Are you attempting to threaten me? I am presenting truth, Adrian replied calmly. Nothing more. He placed the papers on the table and slid them forward. Inside were accounts from households where Eleonora had once visited as a companion, written testimonies noting her severity with young children, a subtle pattern of emotional pressure, and her difficulty managing those she believed beneath her care. None were dramatic, but together they painted a consistent picture. Greybrier's face hardened. These hold no legal weight, he said. They hold public weight, Adrian countered. And should this matter escalate to court, every detail of the engagement's dissolution will be exposed, along with Eleonora's conduct. I have no desire to bring such scrutiny upon your family, but I will not allow mine to be crushed to preserve a facade. Greybrier's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. You would tarnish her reputation? No, Adrian said, voice steady. But I will protect my children, and I will not let lies define the end of this arrangement. A brittle silence settled between them. Greybrier finally spoke, each word clipped. You care more for the opinion of a servant than for the alliance my family offered. Adrian's expression sharpened. If you speak of Marin, let me be clear. She acted out of concern for children who could not speak for themselves, and I will not allow her to be used as a shield for your anger. Greybrier blinked, taken aback by the controlled force of his words. I see, he said slowly. You value her. With all due respect, Adrian replied, her worth is not for you to measure. Another long pause. This one shifted. Greybrier leaned back, his shoulders stiff but his tone less heated. What do you propose? A settlement, Adrian said. You will allow the original loan terms to stand. No accelerated repayment, no public dispute, no whisper suggesting my household acted dishonorably. In return, I will ensure no damaging details regarding your daughter ever surface. Greybrier considered this in silence, calculating, dissecting, testing. At last he exhaled sharply. One condition. I'm listening. You and your household will refrain from speaking her name in relation to this matter. She will not be blamed publicly or privately. Adrian nodded once. Agreed. Greybrier tapped a finger on the table. Very well. My solicitors will prepare the revised agreement. But consider this, Winthorpe. Alliances are delicate. Once broken, they do not mend. They do not need to, Adrian said quietly. Greybrier's gaze lingered on him, searching for the weakness he expected to find. He found none. The meeting ended with formal bows, each man walking away with dignity tempered by necessity. The ride back to Ravenshade felt lighter, though not without its shadows. Adrian stared out the carriage window as rolling fields blurred beneath the evening sky, his thoughts drifting to the small room beneath the eaves where a trunk still sat open. Marin had not given him her answer yet. He had not asked again. He would not. But he hoped. When he arrived home, the children greeted him with relieved smiles, their arms wrapped tightly around him, and for the first time in days he breathed without tension. Later, as he walked the corridor toward the servants' wing, he paused outside Marin's door. The faint warmth of candlelight glowed beneath it. He considered knocking. He considered waiting. He considered all the possibilities that rested in the quiet between them. Then, with a soft breath, he stepped back. Some choices required patience, and some hopes needed room to grow. As he returned to his chambers, a quiet certainty settled within him. He had defended his family, not with anger, but with truth. Whatever came next, he no longer faced it alone. The days following Adrian's return flowed with a quiet, tentative peace. Ravenshade Manor remained tender around the edges, still recovering from the storm that had passed, yet strangely warmer than before, like a house that had withstood winter and begun to thaw. The children sensed the shift first. Lysander lingered near Marin with a cautious hopefulness, while Claire, braver in small ways, slipped her hand into hers whenever she could, as though ensuring Marin had not drifted too far from reach. Marin, however, still moved through the manor with a careful restraint. She had not finished packing, but she had not unpacked either. Her room held the stillness of uncertainty. An open trunk, an undisturbed bed, and a ribbon resting atop her pillow like a question waiting to be answered. 3 days passed before she sought Adrian out. He was in the garden behind the manor, standing beneath the sprawling branches of an old elm. The late afternoon light sifted through the leaves, dappling the ground with quiet gold. He looked up at the sound of her steps, his expression shifting subtly, relief softening into something gentler. "Marin," he said, as though the name itself released a breath he had been holding. She approached slowly, folding her hands in front of her. "I wanted to speak with you when the children were resting." He nodded, waiting without urging her forward. "I've given thought to everything," she said. The rumors, the estate, the consequences of staying, and the consequences of leaving. His gaze remained steady. I worried, she continued, that my presence would harm the children more than help them, that my staying would tie your hands, that I would become the reason others judged your decisions. She drew a careful breath. But I realized something these past days. He stepped closer, not interrupting. Lysander won't look me in the eye when he thinks I might disappear, she said softly. Claire wakes from naps to check whether I'm still there. They aren't afraid of scandal. They're afraid of losing someone who has been constant. Her voice faltered slightly. Leaving would protect no one. It would only break what they're trying so hard to rebuild. His expression warmed, though he remained silent, letting her speak freely. And as for you, her words slowed, as though shape and courage arrived together. You never asked me to choose for your sake. You only asked me to choose honestly. A gentle stillness settled between them. I know my answer now, she said quietly. He breathed her name again, almost a whisper. Marin. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling only slightly. If your offer still stands, if your question still remains, her voice softened into certainty. Then yes, I will marry you. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. His hand tightened around hers with deliberate tenderness, and in his eyes she saw something rare. A man who had shouldered too much for too long finally allowed to breathe without restraint. Thank you, he murmured. It was not the triumphant gratitude of someone granted a wish, but the quiet thanks of a soul given shelter. She smiled softly. You don't need to thank me. I do, he said, lifting her hand gently. Because you chose us. They stood beneath the elm tree in the fading light, the warmth settling around them with the ease of something long overdue. And in that stillness, neither needed to say more. The wedding took place in Ravenshade's small chapel, a modest stone building tucked beneath climbing ivy and surrounded by white flowering shrubs. Only a few close members of the household attended, Lady Honoria, whose sternness had softened into acceptance, the steward and his wife, the housekeeper who had watched over the family since Adrian's childhood. Marin stood at the chapel entrance in a simple gown of soft cream, the fabric gathered at her waist with a delicate ribbon Lysander had chosen. Claire held a small bouquet of garden flowers, daisies, rosemary, and a single pale rose. Lysander stood straighter than usual, pride shining in his eyes like morning light. Adrian waited near the altar, his expression composed yet touched by something unmistakably tender. When Marin stepped forward, Claire slipped her free hand into hers, guiding her toward the man who would soon become her husband. Lysander followed close behind, as though escorting her together. No music played. No grand procession echoed through the walls, only the soft sounds of their footsteps and the quiet hum of anticipation filled the chapel. When Marin reached him, Adrian extended his hand. She placed hers in it, and in that simple gesture, two fractured pieces of a once broken family aligned with gentle certainty. The vows exchanged were traditional, yet each word seemed to lift a weight neither had fully realized they carried. When they spoke of loyalty, the room felt warmer. When they spoke of care, Claire leaned her head against Marin's arm. When they spoke of choosing each other, Lysander stood closer, his shoulders relaxing as though he had finally found the ground beneath him. When the ceremony ended, and Adrian lifted her veil to kiss her, Claire whispered, Mama Marin, in a breath so soft it seemed woven into the air itself. Marin's eyes glistened, but she held the moment quietly, tenderly, as though cradling a secret she had longed to hear. In the months that followed, Ravenshade settled into an unhurried rhythm. The estate did not transform into prosperity overnight, but the dread that once haunted its corridors faded. Adrian worked tirelessly, rebuilding each strained partnership with integrity. Honoria assisted where she could, guiding Marin through the intricate customs of her new role, not as a critic, but as a mentor. Marin took to the responsibilities with the same gentle resilience she had always shown. She learned to manage household affairs with confidence, to speak at gatherings with measured poise, and to represent Ravenshade with grace that never betrayed her origins. But she never let her new title distance her from the children. She read to Claire beneath the window's afternoon light. She accompanied Lysander through the orchard trails, listening as he spoke more freely than he ever dared before. And in time, both children moved through Ravenshade not with fear, but with the quiet assurance of a home restored. Adrian often paused in the doorway to watch them, Marin guiding Claire's hand as she practiced her letters, Lysander leaning against her side as he recited lines from a book. And each time the sight rooted something deeper in him than gratitude. It was peace, a steady, humble peace, the kind no title or fortune could ever equal. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Marin stood on the west terrace, watching the sky fade into hues of lavender and gold. Adrian joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Ravenshade suits you," he said softly. She smiled. "I hope I suit Ravenshade." "You do," he murmured. "You always have." She leaned into him, letting the quiet settle around them. The manor behind them glowed with warm lamplight, and somewhere within the children's laughter echoed down the corridor. "Everything feels—" she began. "Whole," he offered. She nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. "Whole." He brushed a kiss against her temple. "Then we've done well." Together they watched the last light fade, content not because life had become perfect, but because the storm had passed, and what remained was a family rebuilt not from obligation but from choice. And in that choice, they found the future they once feared might never come.